What if the world is not as solid as we imagine? What if beneath the ground we walk on every day, there are places that quietly defy our sense of scale, time, and certainty? The surface of the earth feels stable, mapped, and familiar. Roads follow predictable lines. Cities glow at night, visible from space. We tell ourselves the age of discovery is over. And yet, beneath that thin crust of certainty, the planet opens into darkness. Caves have always unsettled us. They are older than language, older than memory. Long before written history, humans marked cave walls with images of animals, hands pressed into stone as if to say, "I was here." Caves were shelters, sanctuaries, burial grounds. They were also thresholds, openings that suggested the world did not end where sunlight faded, but continued inward, deeper into something unknown. Across cultures, caves became metaphors for the unseen. The Greek underworld, the Maya realm of the dead. Sacred caverns guarded by spirits, gods, or warnings. These stories were not just superstition. They reflected a human intuition that the earth contains layers of reality we do not fully understand. Even now, with our instruments and equations, that intuition lingers. In the modern age, caves should feel ordinary. We classify them by limestone and lava, by erosion and water tables. We map passages and measure depths. We give them names and coordinates. And yet, every so often, someone stumbles into a cavern that refuses to behave like it should. A hole with no measurable bottom, a sealed ecosystem untouched by sunlight for millions of years. A chamber so vast it creates its own weather. A city carved underground on a scale that still defies explanation. These are not just curiosities. They are interruptions. Each one quietly asks a question we are not always comfortable answering. How much of our world remains unknown? How confident should we be in our explanations? And what does it mean when reality turns out to be larger, stranger, or older than we expected? The stories that follow are not about monsters or hidden empires waiting to rise. They are about people encountering limits of knowledge, of technology, of imagination. Farmers breaking through a wall and finding a city beneath their home. Miners drilling into heat and crystal and realizing the earth has been building wonders for 500,000 years without us. Scientists lowering themselves into darkness only to discover life thriving where life should not exist at all. In some cases, the discoveries are documented and measurable. Oxygen levels, temperatures, DNA sequences. In others, the evidence is less concrete, filtered through testimony, legend, or loss. A voice on late-night radio describing a hole that swallows everything. An expedition that returns with silence where answers were expected. A cave that exists, but not in the way anyone agrees upon. This is not a journey into certainty. It is a journey into ambiguity. Each descent brings discovery, but also doubt. Each revelation opens another question. That rhythm, mystery, revelation, reflection, is the pulse of exploration itself. What unites these caves is not danger or drama, but perspective. They remind us that the planet is not finished revealing itself, that beneath our feet are worlds shaped by timescales that make human history feel brief and fragile, that life, intelligence, and structure can arise in conditions we once thought impossible. As we begin this journey underground, it helps to let go of the need for tidy conclusions. Some of these places have been sealed again by water, ice, or law. Some remain inaccessible, waiting for tools that do not yet exist. Others may never fully explain themselves at all. But perhaps that is the point. Caves do not offer answers easily. They invite humility. They ask us to listen more than we declare, to observe more than we assume. They remind us that exploration is not only about conquering space, but about accepting uncertainty. The Earth is not just a surface. It is a volume, and in its depths are stories that challenge what we think we know, about nature, about history, and about ourselves. The first step is simply this: to acknowledge that the ground beneath us may still hold places that should not exist, and yet do. What would it mean to find a place that seems to have no bottom? A void so deep that it resists measurement, explanation, even belief. In the late 20th century, one such story slipped quietly into American folklore, not through a scientific journal or official report, but through the soft static of late-night radio. In 1997, a man calling himself Mel described a hole on his rural property in Washington state. At first, it sounded ordinary, a narrow opening in the ground known to locals for generations. People had thrown trash into it for decades, old appliances, scrap metal, even dead animals. Nothing ever filled it. Nothing ever came back up. No one heard anything hit bottom. Curiosity, Mel said, eventually replaced indifference. He began lowering fishing line into the hole, weighted and carefully measured. Thousands of feet disappeared into darkness, then tens of thousands. According to his account, he lowered more than 15 miles of line without reaching the end. The line simply vanished downward, as if the earth had opened into something larger than itself. On its own, this would be an odd story, but not an unforgettable one. What gave it staying power were the details that followed. Mel spoke of objects behaving strangely near the opening, of animals refusing to approach it, of a neighbor lowering a deceased dog into the hole, only to have it returned days later, alive, uninjured, unmistakably the same animal. Listeners leaned closer to their radios, not because the story felt provably true, but because it felt carefully told. Calm, unhurried, almost reluctant. Mel did not sound like someone chasing attention. He sounded like someone struggling to make sense of something that no longer fit his understanding of the world. Then there were the interruptions. Men arriving to inspect the land, equipment brought in without clear explanation, pressure to sell the property. Eventually, Mel stopped calling. The voice disappeared. The hole, if it existed, slipped back into silence. Skeptics were quick to respond. No geological survey confirmed such a feature. No satellite imagery revealed a mysterious pit. When researchers searched the area near Ellensburg, they found nothing unusual. No scar in the land, no evidence of generations of dumping. To many, that settled it. A hoax. A modern myth spun for entertainment. And yet the story refused to vanish, not because it proved anything, but because it echoed something familiar. Around the world there are deep shafts that challenge explanation, natural pits that descend farther than expected, sinkholes that open suddenly and swallow forests, roads, even buildings. The Earth, it turns out, is capable of producing vertical spaces that feel profoundly unsettling. The persistence of the story may say less about geology and more about psychology. We are deeply uncomfortable with bottomless things. Oceans, space, time itself. A hole with no end disrupts our sense of containment. It suggests that the ground beneath us is not a reliable boundary, but a thin layer stretched over vast unknowns. Whether Mel's hole was real, exaggerated, or entirely imagined almost becomes secondary. The story survives because it touches a nerve. It invites us to consider the possibility that there are places we cannot fully investigate, not because they are hidden, but because they exceed our tools and categories. What if some discoveries resist verification, not because they are false, but because they sit at the edge of what our methods can confirm? And how many such stories have been dismissed, not out of careful inquiry, but out of discomfort with their implications? The whole, in the end, becomes a symbol. A reminder that certainty is often a surface phenomenon, that beneath our explanations may lie depths we have not measured, and perhaps cannot. The Earth does not always announce its secrets with clarity. Sometimes it simply opens, silently, and waits for us to decide how much mystery we are willing to tolerate. What if a cave held a library not of paper and ink, but of metal? Not stories, but secrets, cast in unfamiliar symbols by hands long forgotten. In the thick jungles of Ecuador, there is a cave that some believe contains just that, an archive from an ancient civilization that shouldn't exist. They call it the Cave of the Taios, the Cave of the Oil Birds. Nestled in the Amazon, it stretches for miles beneath the surface, a labyrinth of stone and silence. But it was not the length or depth of the cave that drew attention. It was the claim made by an explorer named Juan Morix in the late 1960s that deep within the cave system he had discovered a vast chamber, its walls carved with geometric precision, housing artifacts made of gold and a library composed entirely of metal tablets. These weren't casual rumors. Moritz went public with his story, and others listened. Among them, Erich von Däniken, author of controversial theories about ancient extraterrestrial visitors. In 1976, the story gained unprecedented attention when an official expedition was organized, and Neil Armstrong, the first human to set foot on the moon, served as its honorary leader. The expedition was massive. It included British and Ecuadorian military personnel, engineers, and scientists. They descended into the Cave of the Taios, guided by the Shuar people, indigenous guardians of the region who had long considered the cave sacred and dangerous. Inside, the team found chambers that appeared too perfect to be natural, walls so smooth they seemed machined, passages cut at right angles. Some artifacts were documented, odd objects, strange arrangements, but no metal library was officially reported. Still, whispers emerged later, that discoveries had been made but hidden, that certain sections had been sealed, that science had replaced what was once fervent inquiry. The Ecuadorian government now restricts access. Citing both safety and respect for the Shuar's cultural claims, large portions of the cave remain unexplored. And yet, the Shuar continue to speak of the knowledge held deep within, knowledge left by beings who came not from the sky, but from within the earth. Not gods, but ancient intelligences. Most of the world moved on. Scientists dismissed the story. No metal library has ever been presented. No photographs, no physical proof. Just rumors, just memories. Just the sense that something unusual occurred and then was quietly folded into silence. But the cave remains. It breathes its own darkness. Teams who have returned speak of chambers still uncharted, depths still unreachable. In a few places, the geometry of the rock defies easy explanation. A room that seems carved, a passage that doesn't echo. It is easy, perhaps comforting, to dismiss all this as misinterpretation or fantasy. Yet we know that caves preserve things. Bones, tools, drawings, even human footprints can survive for millennia in such stillness. So if something was hidden, what better place than a cave? And if it remains hidden, what does that suggest about our readiness to find it? The Cave of the Taios becomes not just a location, but a metaphor, for knowledge buried too deep to reach, for truths that wait until the world is ready, for civilizations that vanish not in fire or war, but in the slow fade of memory. What if the purpose of such a cave is not to be explored quickly, but to be understood slowly, over generations, through layers of interpretation? What if deep inside, past the reach of light, a kind of memory still waits? Not myth, but record. Not story, but fact. Inscribed not in ink, but in metal, for those who dare to descend far enough to find it. What if life could exist without sunlight? Not in the cold void of space, but right here, beneath the soil, beyond the reach of daylight and photosynthesis. In 1986, in a forgotten corner of Romania, workers preparing the site for a power plant accidentally uncovered a place that had not seen the surface in 5.5 million years. It would come to be known as Mobile Cave, and it would change everything we thought we knew about life. At first glance, the cave was unremarkable. Small, narrow passages, only a few hundred meters in total. But its air was thick, toxic to humans. High in carbon dioxide, rich in hydrogen sulfide, and nearly devoid of oxygen, the environment was considered lethal. And yet, something was alive down there. In that alien atmosphere, scientists discovered a thriving ecosystem, utterly isolated. Over 50 species, at least 35 of which had never been seen before, were found within Movile's chambers. Pale, eyeless spiders, transparent water scorpions, strange worms that slithered through a silent world untouched by the sun. Creatures not just hidden, but evolved along a different branch of life's tree, separated by millions of years, shaped by chemical energy rather than light. Instead of photosynthesis, life in Movile Cave depends on chemosynthesis. Bacteria at the base of the food chain convert chemicals like hydrogen sulfide into energy. Larger organisms feed on these bacteria, and so on up the chain. No sunlight, no plants, no connection to the ecosystems above. Before this, such systems had only been discovered around deep-sea vents in the 1970s, alien oases in the crushing depths of the ocean. But Movile proved that similar ecosystems could exist beneath dry land, sealed away, self-contained, and self-sustaining. To protect it, access to the cave is now highly restricted. Fewer than 100 people have ever entered. Researchers pass through a series of airlocks to avoid contaminating the delicate atmosphere. The Romanian government treats it as a scientific treasure, an evolutionary time capsule. Movile raises questions far beyond its narrow passages. If life can survive here, where else might it be hiding? Could similar ecosystems exist in other sealed caves, still waiting to be found? Could life exist beneath the ice of Europa, or in the subsurface oceans of Enceladus, powered not by starlight, but by heat and chemistry? Movile also reminds us of something humbler. Oh dear, that the Earth itself contains mysteries we have not yet solved, that evolution is not a single path, but many, that nature finds ways to persist in even the most extreme and improbable corners. Perhaps what's most haunting is the sense that Movile didn't just survive. It flourished, in total isolation, without ever needing us. The creatures of Movile are not relics. They are not dying remnants of some forgotten past. They are thriving citizens of a world that until recently we didn't know existed. Their silence is not evidence of absence. It is simply the mark of a world that never needed to speak to ours. What other ecosystems, what other life forms might be buried in the folds of the earth, quietly evolving their own stories? What else waits, patient and self-sufficient, in the darkness below? We often assume that what we do not see must not exist. Movile Cave proves otherwise. Life does not ask for permission. It does not wait for light. It simply finds a way. What if a cave was not just a hollow in the earth, but a self-contained world, complete with weather, jungles, and rivers flowing through silence? In the jungles of central Vietnam, a farmer named Ho Khan stumbled upon such a place in 1990. He had been searching for food, navigating the dense foliage of Phong Nha Ke Bang, when he felt a strange draft of wind, cold and constant, seeping from a crack in the stone. From within came the unmistakable sound of rushing water. He did not enter. He simply remembered. It would take nearly 2 decades before that memory led explorers back to the hidden entrance. In 2009, when Ho Khan helped guide a British-Vietnamese expedition to the site, what they found stunned the scientific world. The cave they named Sơn Đoòng, meaning Mountain River Cave, was unlike anything ever seen. Not only was it vast, it was alive. The main passage stretches over 3 miles long, more than 650 feet wide, and towers nearly 500 feet tall. A Boeing 747 could fly through without touching the walls. But size was only part of the revelation. Sơn Đoòng didn't feel like a cave. It felt like stepping into a secret planet. Inside, explorers encountered clouds drifting beneath a stone sky. The air moved on its own, stirred by subtle shifts in temperature. Fog pooled like breath. Rain occasionally fell, not from storm clouds above, but from condensation high on the cave's ceiling. The system had created its own weather. Then came the gardens. Massive dolines, sinkholes where the ceiling had collapsed, allowed sunlight to pierce the darkness. In those illuminated pockets, entire jungles had taken root. Trees, some over 100 feet tall, rose toward the narrow beams of light. Birds circled overhead. Monkeys called from the heights. Evolution had begun a separate experiment, shaping species unique to this underground Eden. There were rivers, fish that had never been catalogued, insects found nowhere else on Earth. In the deepest parts of the cave, human light could not touch the ceiling or the far walls. Darkness had mass. Stillness had depth. It felt less like walking into a cavern and more like walking through the lungs of the planet itself. Scientists and adventurers compared the experience to being on another world, a world that had existed quietly for millions of years without interruption. A world that had no need for surface validation. Since its rediscovery, Sơn Đoòng has been subject to careful tourism. Only a few hundred permits are issued each year. Access is tightly controlled. Proposals to install cable cars or build extensive infrastructure have been rejected so far. What makes Sơn Đoòng so philosophically disruptive is not just its size or its beauty, it is its autonomy. It challenges the notion that everything on Earth has been found, mapped, named. That wilderness only exists where we allow it to. Sơn Đoòng didn't wait for us. It evolved without us. It flourished in secrecy. And when it was found, it was not tamed. It was simply revealed. There may be other caves like it, hidden by jungle, sealed by stone, known only to the wind that escapes through narrow cracks. The karst landscapes of Vietnam contain hundreds of unexplored systems. Sơn Đoòng may not be an anomaly. It may be a doorway. And so the cave asks a question, quietly, insistently. If an entire ecosystem, complete with weather, rivers, and life, can exist in silence for millions of years beneath our feet, what else is out there? What other worlds are breathing in the dark, waiting for someone to listen? Not every frontier lies above us. Some are below, where the earth dreams in chambers too vast for our imaginations and too complex for our instruments to fully comprehend. What if the earth could build cathedrals without architects? Structures of such beauty and scale that they seem carved not by nature, but by some vast, patient intelligence. In the deserts of northern Mexico, beneath the Naica mountain, such a place exists, a chamber of crystal unlike anything else on Earth. In the year 2000, miners searching for lead and silver broke through a cavity 1,000 feet below the surface. What they saw defied understanding. A vast chamber shimmered with colossal crystals, translucent beams of selenite, some over 35 feet long, weighing up to 55 tons. These structures were not delicate or decorative. They were massive, monumental, as if the earth itself had been dreaming in symmetry for 500,000 years. They called it the Cave of Crystals. The conditions inside were nearly unlivable. The temperature soared above 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity hovered near 100%. Without special cooling suits and breathing apparatus, humans could survive only minutes. This was not a space meant for us. It was an alien world beneath our own. The crystals had grown slowly, molecule by molecule, in a bath of superheated, mineral-rich groundwater. For over 500,000 years, that water remained undisturbed, allowing the crystals to reach impossible sizes. When the mining company pumped out the water to reach ore deposits, they accidentally drained the cave and froze a process that had been evolving longer than human civilization. But draining the cave did more than halt the growth. It opened a window into a secret environment. Scientists ventured in with care and awe. Some reported sensations akin to religious experience. The glow of light through crystal, the immense, silent weight of time. It was not just the beauty of the space. It was the feeling that one was standing inside something the earth had built in solitude, with no witnesses. Inside the crystals, researchers found something even more surprising: fluid inclusions. Tiny pockets of ancient water trapped as the crystals grew. And within some of those pockets, they discovered dormant microbes. When revived, they returned to life, organisms sealed for tens of thousands of years, alive in a suspended state within crystal walls. It was a moment that blurred the line between geology and biology, between the inanimate and the living. The cave was not just a monument, it was a vault, a place where time and life had mingled in silence, waiting for accidental discovery. In 2015, the mine stopped pumping water. The cave began to flood again. Slowly, inevitably, the chamber returned to its natural state. The crystals resumed their ancient growth, unhurried and unseen. The window closed. Now the cave of crystals is lost once more, hidden beneath rising water, protected by heat and pressure beyond the reach of casual visitors. Only a handful of people ever saw it, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some places are not meant to be possessed, only glimpsed. The cave is a reminder that Earth is still capable of astonishment, that not all of its beauty has been shaped by wind or water or erosion. Some of it has grown in silence, deep underground, in chambers of extreme heat and pressure, places where life can sleep in stone and time itself becomes a sculptor. What else lies beneath us, crystallizing in secret? What forms are taking shape in the deep, slow processes of the earth, unnoticed by those of us who live only on its surface? The Cave of Crystals may not be unique. It may be one of many such vaults, each sealed by nature, each guarding a timeline we can barely comprehend. And if that's true, then the earth is not just our home. It is an artist, a caretaker, and a keeper of secrets still unfolding in the dark. What if beneath a mountain stood not emptiness, but a city? Not ruins of stone, but a functioning, engineered society built entirely underground. In the heart of Turkey's Cappadocia region, such a place exists. Its discovery began with a simple renovation. In 1963, a man broke through the wall of his basement and found not a forgotten room, but a passageway. Beyond it, an entire world. This was Derinkuyu, a subterranean metropolis descending over 280 feet into the volcanic rock. A city carved by hand, layer by layer, into the earth. At least 18 levels deep. Enough to shelter 20,000 people, along with their livestock, food, and water. It is not a myth. It is real. You can walk through it. What makes Derinkuyu astonishing is not just its scale. It is its completeness. There are living quarters and communal kitchens, schools and wine cellars, chapels and ventilation shafts that still function today. Rolling stone doors, massive circular slabs, could seal off sections in case of invasion. The design is not crude. It is deliberate, sophisticated, alive with purpose. Who built it, and why? The standard story is that early Christians expanded these spaces to escape persecution. And that may be partially true, but Derinkuyu predates Christianity. The deepest levels may be thousands of years older. Some believe the Phrygians began the excavation around 1200 BCE. Others argue that its origins reach even further back, into the mists of forgotten civilizations. You don't dig 4 million cubic feet of stone for a temporary refuge. You don't build a city beneath the earth unless you plan to live there. Long-term, generationally. Derinkuyu was not just a shelter. It was a way of life, a choice to move downward, to safety, to silence. Its passages stretch for miles, connecting to other underground cities. Some of those links are known. Others remain unexplored. Every few years, a new tunnel or chamber is discovered, another thread in a vast buried network. There's an eerie feeling in Derinkuyu's lower levels. A pressure, a quiet, the weight of history pressing down from every direction. Visitors speak of a presence, not supernatural, but architectural, a consciousness embedded in stone, as if the builders are still there watching. Some rooms remain sealed, others lie beneath collapsed rock. Entire sections may still be hidden. What tools were used? What knowledge guided the construction? We have guesses, but we don't truly know. Derinkuyu unsettles historians because it doesn't fit neatly into the timeline of technological progress. How did ancient people achieve such engineering feats without modern tools? How did they manage airflow, water distribution, waste removal? Why did they choose to live underground at all? One theory suggests a response to war or natural catastrophe. Another hints at something deeper, a long-forgotten threat, a memory passed down not in text but in architecture. Build down, stay hidden, survive. Whatever the reason, the city endures. It has outlasted empires, languages, religions, and even now we have not fully explored it. We have only scratched the surface, literally. Derinkuyu asks a question modern people rarely consider. What if the future once went underground? What if the most advanced ideas of a civilization were carved into silence, beneath the reach of destruction? It also whispers something more personal, that safety and knowledge are sometimes preserved not in books or monuments, but in shelter, in quiet, in stone. As we walk its halls, we are reminded civilization is not always visible. Sometimes it moves below, where time flows differently, and the weight of the earth keeps its stories in place until we are ready to hear them. What if the legends of ancient gateways weren't entirely symbolic? What if somewhere in the frozen north, beneath permafrost and silence, there existed entrances to realms neither science nor story can fully explain? In the remote stretches of Siberia's Sakha Republic, the indigenous Yakut people have long spoken of a mysterious place they call the Valley of Death. According to their oral traditions, strange metallic domes emerge from the ground, silent structures that glow at night, make people ill, and vanish into the snow. They are said to guard openings into the earth, places from which some never return. For generations, these stories were dismissed as folklore, isolated communities preserving myths to explain the unexplainable. But in 2014, something happened that challenged that dismissal. The earth itself opened. A series of massive craters began appearing across the Siberian tundra, deep cylindrical holes punched into the frozen ground as if from within. The most famous, on the Yamal Peninsula, was over 200 feet wide and perfectly round. More followed. The phenomenon puzzled scientists. The official explanation, methane gas trapped beneath the thawing permafrost, had built up pressure and exploded upward, creating the craters. It made sense, on paper. But the explanation didn't account for everything. Some of the craters led to cave systems. Some contained signs of extreme heat, as if scorched from within. And others displayed magnetic anomalies, locations where compasses failed and electronics malfunctioned. Expeditions into these craters faced intense challenges: shifting ice, unstable walls, toxic gases. Most explorations were brief, cautious, inconclusive. But what they did reveal hinted at an underground landscape far more complex than previously imagined. Networks of voids and tunnels, some natural, others suspiciously geometric. In the 1990s, a team investigating Yakut legends claimed to find metallic debris buried in the permafrost. Not from Soviet machinery, not natural formations. something else. The details were never fully verified, but the story persisted in quiet corners of scientific and indigenous communities alike. What's unsettling isn't the lack of proof, it's the sense of something just beyond it. The permafrost is melting faster in Siberia than almost anywhere else on Earth. As it thaws, it reveals things lost for tens of thousands of years: mammoth carcasses, ancient tools, now strange cavities and unexplained structures. Things that were sealed by ice since before the rise of recorded history. Some locals say they've seen new cave entrances open where none existed before. That sounds impossible until you realize that much of Siberia remains unmapped, especially below the surface. What appears static from above may be riddled with complexity below. The Valley of Death may never yield a single, definitive truth, but its stories matter because they speak of thresholds, moments where humans sense something is wrong with the land, where mystery clings to the ground itself. Whether through ancient memory or recent observation, people continue to feel that certain places are not meant to be crossed. Perhaps what the Yakut elders have always known is that not all gateways are metaphors. Some are literal, some are dangerous, and some are both. The earth is changing, the ice is receding, and in the thaw, new landscapes are emerging, landscapes that have never been seen by modern eyes. The question is no longer whether impossible places exist, but how many have yet to be uncovered. And when they are, what will we do with them? Explore them? Protect them? Or turn away, uncomfortable with the idea that the earth still holds secrets it has not yet chosen to give up? Sometimes the planet keeps things hidden, not out of malice, but because we are not ready to receive them. The Valley of Death waits. So do its craters, so do its legends, and perhaps somewhere within that silence, the truth sleeps beneath the thawing ground. What if the ocean floor was not the final boundary? What if, beneath the water, there were portals that plunged deeper still, vertical shafts carved into the earth, their depths unknown, their origins ancient? In the Bahamas, one such place exists, a blue hole, calm, circular, impossibly deep. Its name is Dean's Blue Hole, and it leads into darkness no diver has fully conquered. Blue holes are underwater sinkholes, formed during ice ages when sea levels were lower and rainwater dissolved the limestone bedrock. When the seas rose again, the caves flooded, leaving behind vertical openings filled with clear blue water. Most descend a few hundred feet. But Dean's Blue Hole plunges 663 feet straight down, making it the deepest known of its kind. From the surface it appears serene, a circle of deeper blue in a shallow lagoon, surrounded by white sand. But to descend into it is to leave the surface world behind. The light fades rapidly, the water grows colder, sound becomes muffled. Divers describe the feeling as stepping into a liquid cathedral, beautiful, still, and heavy with silence. At its deepest levels, Dean's Blue Hole doesn't end. It continues. Divers report horizontal passages branching from the bottom, tunnels that stretch away into darkness, unmapped and unreachable. The cave does not just go down, it goes elsewhere. These tunnels remain largely unexplored. The pressure at those depths is punishing. Past 200 feet, divers require complex gas mixtures to survive. Below 400 feet, only the most elite technical divers can descend, and even they are limited to minutes. Past that, no one has followed the tunnels. No one knows where they lead. In 2010, freediver William Trubridge set a world record by descending over 330 feet into Dean's Blue Hole on a single breath. No tank, no rope, just his body and the void. He described the sensation as both beautiful and terrifying, the sense that the cave beneath him continued endlessly into blackness, a place where no light or human help could reach. Geologists believe the horizontal passages were formed during dry periods when the cave was above sea level. Rainwater carved its way through the stone, creating a labyrinth now submerged and sealed. If that's true, those tunnels could stretch for miles. They could connect to other blue holes. They could contain chambers not seen since the last ice age. What fossils might lie there? What preserved bones or artifacts, untouched by time? What species adapted to that eternal darkness? We don't know, because we can't go. Dean's Blue Hole sits at the edge of exploration, not because it's unreachable, but because it exists in that narrow band of danger where human limits meet natural vastness. We can descend part way. We can glimpse the tunnels, but we can't follow them. Not yet. And so the cave remains like a question half-asked. A doorway we've seen but haven't stepped through. A place that invites imagination as much as investigation. Its very existence challenges our assumptions about boundaries. That the surface ends at the ocean floor. That caves belong to land. That exploration is something we left behind in another century. But the truth we've barely begun. Dean's Blue Hole is not unique. Similar formations exist throughout the Caribbean and Pacific. Many remain uncharted. Many may connect below the seabed in networks older than memory. Perhaps someday new technology will allow us to descend fully, to map the tunnels, to bring light where there has only been dark. Until then, Dean's Blue Hole waits. A still blue eye gazing upward, revealing nothing. And we, suspended above it, are reminded that the earth still holds places where our knowledge stops. Places that remain not because they are hidden, but because they do not yet belong to us. What if myths of the underworld were never meant to be metaphor? What if, beneath the jungles of Central America, there truly were entrances to a realm of the dead, one built not on belief, but on stone, water, and time? In the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, the Maya civilization once flourished, mapping the stars, mastering agriculture, and building cities that rivaled anything in the ancient world. But beneath their feet, they believed, was something more. Xibalba, the place of fear. The Maya spoke of it not as legend, but as location, a literal underworld, and the entrances were caves. Today, science has caught up with that intuition. Beneath the Yucatan lies one of the most extensive networks of flooded caves on Earth. Called cenotes, these openings connect to an underground labyrinth stretching for hundreds of miles. They twist through the limestone bedrock in patterns too complex for maps to capture. Many are still unexplored. Some are completely submerged. But they contain more than water. In 2018, divers exploring the Sac Octun system, the longest underwater cave system in the world, found human remains more than 100 feet below the waterline. These bones dated back over 10,000 years, to the end of the last ice age, long before the rise of the Maya. They weren't accidental drownings. They were burials. Alongside them lay the bones of extinct animals, giant sloths, mastodons, saber-toothed predators, and tools shaped by human hands. These caves had been visited repeatedly, ritually, for millennia. The underwater realms of today were once dry chambers where prehistoric people gathered by firelight, carrying their dead into the darkness. The Maya later inherited this underworld, spiritually and perhaps physically. Within the caves, archaeologists have discovered pottery, carvings, obsidian blades, and offerings to gods of water and death. Some chambers contain altars. Others bear the marks of ritual bloodletting and sacrifice. And some chambers defy explanation. Rooms with perfectly square edges, walls too smooth, too precise to be natural, structures that suggest shaping, intention, construction, though by whom and when, no one can say. Geological models don't easily account for such features. The deeper divers go, the stranger it becomes. In passages where no light has ever reached, they've found human artifacts placed with care, symbols left behind in total blackness. It is not difficult to understand why the Maya believed these were the domains of gods. But what's more unsettling is that the caves appear to have been used continuously, from before recorded history through the height of Maya civilization, not as temporary shelters, but as sacred destinations. People return to these depths generation after generation, as if something awaited them there. Could it be that memory outlasts history? That ancient knowledge of the underworld was passed not in writing, but in footsteps? Modern exploration continues, slowly. Each new expedition adds a few more miles of mapped passage, a few more fragments of pottery, a few more bones. But much of the cave system remains unknown. Many entrances lie beneath dense jungle or within private land. Some are flooded beyond reach. Others remain sealed by collapsed stone. Still, the caves persist, quiet, vast, and filled with echoes of the dead. They remind us that the boundary between myth and geology is not always clear. Sometimes what we call legend is just memory wearing the mask of metaphor. The Maya called it Xibalba. Scientists call it Sakaktun. Both may be names for the same thing, a network beneath the earth where time runs differently and where the living and the dead have met for thousands of years. In the flooded dark, something waits. Not just bones, not just relics, but a story too old to tell in words. A memory inscribed in stone, water, and silence. And it is still being written. What if the surface of the earth is merely a thin shell, beneath which entire worlds remain untouched, unmapped, and unsung? Caves have always held this unsettling possibility. But there are some, scattered across continents, that bring this truth into sharp focus. Among them, Mount Shasta. Rising over 14,000 feet in Northern California, Mount Shasta is a solitary volcano capped in snow and shrouded in cloud. Its peak commands the horizon, but it's what lies beneath that has captured imaginations for over a century. Long before European settlers arrived, the indigenous peoples of the region spoke of spirit beings living within the mountain, guardians of wisdom, keepers of balance. But in the 1880s, the legends took a strange turn. A teenager named Frederick Spencer Oliver published a book titled A Dweller on Two Planets, in which he described being led into vast underground chambers beneath Mount Shasta. There he encountered the Lemurians, tall, wise beings said to be survivors of a lost continent. They had preserved their knowledge, he wrote, in caverns deep below, powered by strange technology and sustained by harmony with the earth. It sounded like fantasy, and perhaps it was. But then others began telling similar stories. In the decades that followed, hikers and seekers reported encounters with tall, robed figures in the woods near Shasta. Figures that vanished into solid rock or walked with no footprints. In 1931, a man named Guy Ballard claimed extensive contact with the mountain's hidden inhabitants. His accounts mirrored Oliver's. Underground halls, beings of light, technology beyond explanation. Skeptics scoffed, yet the stories persisted. And geologists confirmed that Mount Shasta is riddled with lava tubes, natural tunnels formed by flowing magma. Some of these tubes extend for miles. Others remain unexplored. A few have never been mapped at all. In the 1970s, researcher William Hamilton claimed to have interviewed people who entered the caves and found smooth walls, artificial feeling passages, and, most curiously, mechanical sounds echoing in the dark. One person described a metal door blocking further entry. Another said they felt watched. There is no definitive proof, no photographs, no verifiable artifacts, only stories. But they come from different people, in different eras, describing the same impossible architecture. And still, Mount Shasta keeps its secrets. The U.S. Forest Service has documented cave entrances, some sealed, others too dangerous to explore. The mountain's geology makes full mapping nearly impossible. Even with modern equipment, large sections remain inaccessible. Is there a civilization inside the mountain? Probably not in the way stories describe, but perhaps the deeper truth lies in how these legends persist. Perhaps the cave systems are real. Perhaps the sense of being watched, of entering a space that feels intentional, is more than imagination. Mount Shasta stands as a monument to the line between seen and unseen, between verifiable geology and whispered memory. Its caves may never yield a Lemurian city, but they do yield something else, an enduring sense of possibility, that maybe, just maybe, not all of history played out in the light. The mountain reminds us that stories are not always lies. Sometimes they are ways of naming the unmeasurable, ways of holding space for what science hasn't reached yet. And in that space, mystery remains alive. We look at Mount Shasta and see a peak, but step into its shadows, and the earth itself begins to whisper of deeper things, of chambers, of tunnels, of lives that may have moved parallel to ours, and just as real. Some caves are empty, some are not. Sometimes the absence of evidence is simply the result of not yet knowing where to look. What if the most advanced architecture of ancient times wasn't above ground, but hidden far below it? In the Cappadocia region of Turkey, beneath soft volcanic rock, an entire network of subterranean cities challenges everything we think we know about early civilizations. But among these underground wonders, one stands out: Derinkuyu. Its discovery was accidental. In 1963, a man renovating his home knocked down a basement wall and uncovered a tunnel. That tunnel led to rooms. The rooms led to corridors. And the corridors led to something astonishing, an 18-level city carved straight into the earth. Derinkuyu plunges 280 feet underground. It's not a cave in the traditional sense. It's not natural. Every passage, every chamber, every air shaft was carved by human hands. And it wasn't just shelter. It was home to up to 20,000 people at once, with kitchens, schools, stables, wells, and churches. It functioned as a fully self-sustained society. Massive stone doors weighing hundreds of pounds could be rolled across entrances to seal off each level, providing protection during times of siege or disaster. Ventilation shafts carried fresh air deep into the earth. Wells tapped into aquifers. Even livestock had designated areas. Every necessity had been accounted for. The engineering was precise, the planning meticulous. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of Derinkuyu isn't what it contains, but what we don't know about it. Who built it, and when? Conventional explanations attribute parts of it to early Christians hiding from persecution in the first centuries CE. But the scale, complexity, and depth suggest much earlier origins. Some scholars believe the Phrygians began carving it out in the 8th century BCE. Others argue it predates them entirely, built by people whose names have been lost to time. You don't create an 18-level city beneath the surface for temporary use. You don't construct miles of interconnecting tunnels without a very specific need, one that doesn't fit comfortably into the narratives we usually tell about ancient life. Even more intriguing, Derinkuyu isn't alone. It's connected via long tunnels, some stretching for miles, to other underground cities. The full extent of this network remains unknown. New chambers and routes are still being discovered today. Was this a response to environmental catastrophe? Invasion? Or was it something else? A deliberate choice to live beneath the earth, to build a civilization in silence and shadow. Modern visitors walk through its upper levels with flashlights and guided tours. But deeper down, access is limited. There are spaces no one has entered in centuries, doors that remain closed, and passages that descend into darkness without end. Derinkuyu isn't just a marvel of engineering, it's an enigma of intent. Its very existence suggests that there are chapters of human history that unfolded far from the light. That perhaps some cultures didn't just survive underground, they thrived there. And if one such society existed, complete with infrastructure, planning, and technology, what else might be waiting beneath other parts of the world? How many underground networks lie undiscovered, mistaken for natural formations, or lost beneath the clutter of modern cities? Derinkuyu forces us to ask, what compels humans to dig deep and stay there? Fear, foresight, or knowledge we no longer possess? It stands not only as a monument to survival, but as a quiet warning that the surface isn't the only place history happens, and that some of the most profound human endeavors may have taken place in total darkness, out of sight, but not out of mind. Beneath our feet, entire societies may have lived and vanished, their stories carved into stone, waiting for us to rediscover them. What if Earth itself guarded memories, not in books or monuments, but in sealed chambers beneath ice and stone? In the remote reaches of Siberia, where temperatures plummet and landscapes stretch unbroken, the ground is not as solid as it seems. Beneath the permafrost lies something ancient, and as the ice melts, that something is waking up. The indigenous Yakut people have long spoken of the Valley of Death, a forbidden zone in the Sakha Republic, said to contain strange, metallic structures half buried in the tundra. They glow at night, make people ill, and vanish back into the earth. These weren't ghost stories, they were warnings. Passed down for generations, they spoke of domes and devices guarding entrances to something deep, hidden, and dangerous. For decades, these tales were dismissed as myth. But in 2014, the earth opened. A crater appeared on the Yamal Peninsula, over 200 feet wide, its walls smooth and cylindrical, as if drilled from below. Others followed, some even larger. They weren't sinkholes or collapsed caverns. They were violent, sudden, and precise. Scientists blamed methane explosions. As permafrost thaws, trapped gas expands, eventually erupting like a pressure valve. The physics checked out, but the mystery deepened. Inside these craters, researchers found caves, cool, silent chambers with signs of extreme heat. Ice fused into glass, walls slick and uneven. Instruments behaved erratically. Some explorers felt watched, others turned back before reaching the bottom. Then came reports of magnetic anomalies and strange debris, fragments that didn't match any known geological pattern or human-made technology. Could these be the structures of Yakut legend? Some believed so. Others insisted on more grounded explanations. But all agreed on one point. The Siberian permafrost was hiding more than anyone had realized. As the climate warms, this frozen world is unraveling. The ground collapses, rivers shift, carcasses of mammoths emerge, tusks intact, eyes still glassy. Ancient tools are found alongside long-extinct animals. Entire cave entrances, once sealed in ice for tens of thousands of years, now gape open to the sky. We are witnessing a planetary exhale. The Valley of Death is no longer just legend. It's becoming a laboratory, a place where time reverses, where extinct bacteria are revived, where cave systems, once considered unreachable, are beginning to reveal their shape. But few dare to explore them deeply. The terrain is unstable, the air toxic, and the past doesn't give up its secrets easily. What makes this place so haunting is its uncertainty. The science is real, the danger is measurable. And yet, beyond that lies something else, something neither fully accepted nor entirely deniable. Are we uncovering natural phenomena, or the remnants of a history so ancient and strange it escaped our record? Perhaps both. Perhaps the line between legend and science is thinner than we think, and some truths wait until conditions are right to emerge. The Yakut legends may not have been metaphors. They may have been memory, encoded in story, preserved through time, and now aligning with what we see in the ground. What else lies beneath the melting ice? The deeper question is not whether something is down there. It is whether we're ready to understand it. Because what's being revealed isn't just physical space. It's a narrative long hidden from the modern world. One of forgotten knowledge, sealed environments, and warnings buried in permafrost. As Siberia thaws, we face a reckoning, not just ecological, but existential. The Earth is remembering, and in that memory may be the keys to parts of ourselves we've long buried. The ground is opening. The past is speaking. The valley waits. What if the final frontier isn't space, but something far closer, beneath our very feet? For all our satellites, maps, and models, there remains a vast, mostly unexplored dimension of Earth, its caves. And some of them don't just stretch deep into the ground. They stretch into something deeper still. Mystery. Each of the places we've explored in this journey shares one unsettling trait. They shouldn't exist, or at least not in the way they do. A bottomless pit that devours 15 miles of line. A cave that births its own clouds. A city underground with air shafts and schoolrooms. These are not footnotes in textbooks. They are reminders that our understanding is not yet complete. But perhaps that's the most hopeful thing of all. Science is not the enemy of wonder. It is its continuation. And these caves, sealed worlds, forgotten chambers, inexplicable ecosystems, are invitations. They ask us to look again, to descend, to listen. New caves are discovered every year. Many lead to unexpected places. Cathedrals of crystal, vaults of ancient air, tunnels older than language. Others hint at past civilizations we barely remember. Derinkuyu, Chibalba. Even now, new connections are being mapped, new chambers opened. But the Earth, as always, reveals its secrets slowly. Some discoveries are silenced, some are disbelieved. A man finds a pit on his land, tells the story, and vanishes from public view. A cave expedition reports impossible architecture, and it's dismissed as exaggeration. In our quest for certainty, we sometimes turn away from truths that challenge our framework, but the Earth does not require our belief to be mysterious. It simply is. These places, Mobile, Sơn Đoòng, the Cave of Crystals, exist. We've walked in them, measured them, photographed them, and yet we do not fully understand them. They are too deep, too hot, too complex, too vast. Some are already closing again, lost to floodwater, law, or decay. Some remain sealed behind doors, literal or bureaucratic. And that's just the ones we've found. How many more lie beneath us, their entrances covered by jungle, or ice, or cities that don't know what's beneath them? How many caves open into chambers where light has never been, where time flows differently, where evolution has written a separate story? We may think of Earth as known, but in truth it is layered, like memory, like myth. The surface is only one level. Beneath it, other narratives wait. Geologic, biological, human, and perhaps something more. Caves are metaphors for descent, for entering the unknown, for moving inward instead of outward. They are where old stories begin, Odysseus, Orpheus, the Buddha, the Christ. They are thresholds, places of death and rebirth, places of silence and revelation. We live in a time obsessed with visibility, but caves remind us of the power of what remains unseen. They ask not for spectacle, but for reverence. They don't offer easy answers, they offer echoes, and sometimes that's enough. Because in the echo, we hear ourselves, our fears, our wonder, our need to ask, what lies beneath? What came before? What have we forgotten? The Earth is still dreaming, and if we're quiet, if we descend slowly, carefully, we may yet discover what it's been dreaming about. The caves lead to places that shouldn't exist, but they do. And maybe, just maybe, that means the world is still far more alive, far more mysterious, and far more sacred than we ever imagined.